I still cook for, my primary living. Writers and advocates aren't exactly known for their riches, so we need to pay bills. So I still cook. I work primarily with private clients and then do some research and development when those projects come along. And then as far as the book and the work around antidepressant withdrawal, that is, just kind of ongoing. It's a perennial thing. So I take opportunities when they come. I seek them out when appropriate, but it's not full time. And I think that that's really good because for lack of a better word, this is a pretty depressing topic. And I hear a lot of really horrific things, and it can be a really tough energetically to be in that space all the time. And so I really like that I have this balance at this point where I can have, tough conversations a lot of the time, or have to really use my brain and read research. And it's taxing. And then I can kind of turn around and make cookies for a day or two. And it's nice.
Yeah, I see it as a
What's the
stress
main
relief
cuisine
with
that
the
you focus on
baking, the
then?
cooking.
I primarily work with elite athletes at this point, so I I do everything, but it's really clean. I mean, it's performance based food, so I'm not deep frying anything or
Yeah,
making big flaky buttery croissants. All about
Hmm.
that stuff when there's a time and a place, but that's not my day to day.
I
Is it true
bet.
that chicken, rice, and broccoli is like the best thing for athletes?
I do a lot of variations of chicken, rice, and broccoli. Yeah, I mean hundreds of variation of chicken, rice, and broccoli, but I really do find that the most effective way to eat is like a protein, a carb, and a vegetable,
Mm.
and kind of don't overcomplicate it. You start covering stuff and sauces, and I don't know. That's kind of where I think people can lose it a little bit from a performance standpoint. But
Um, Brooke, you remind me a bit of Anthony Bourdain, but it's a
oh,
little bit of the reverse of Anthony Bourdain. Um,
yeah,
Anthony Bourdain, unfortunately, towards the end of his life, he passed, and everyone was saying, "We wish he was taking medicine. We wish he was on the meds, right?"
mm-hmm.
Versus you, it's the opposite. It actually
Yeah.
getting off it gave you life.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I have a great amount of kinship. I feel my heart with Bourdain. I did meet him once
Wow.
uh, back. This was 2008. So when I was working in some fancy French restaurants in New York. He's very tall, skinny, but he's not the reason why I got into cooking by any means, but he's one of the reasons why I kind of he helped me understand why I like it, why I liked it, and why I was drawn to it. And yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone really knows the full story there about what happened and the events leading up to it, but I definitely miss his presence in the food world. I think it's a little. We haven't really found a replacement, and probably won't ever will, or we probably won't ever find an adequate one. Maybe a few mediocre ones.
Wow.
Yeah,
What made
that's
Anthony Bourdain so great for you in your eyes? Yeah.
There was an honesty there that I hadn't really encountered at that point. I mean, I do think that when I found his work, I was in my very early 20s. I was still in college and maybe even in high school, and I I I recognized that kitchens were a place where people in pain could go and thrive. And because, this was around the couple years, after my father had died, and I had started to figure out that I needed to navigate a world while feeling this sort of existential pain, and I didn't know how to do that in a regular environment. And it wasn't corporate, that wasn't going to work for me. Finance, I needed something that was more visceral, and it's like, so I was drawn to the fact that you use your hands, and that it's literally bloody, and that there's, you know, knives, and there's an anger that could happen in it, and you could still get paid. I mean, no one was getting paid a lot, so questionable decision making, but it it really spoke to me at the time, and I think that, you know, knowing the folks I know in the industry, that's still very true. And I think that, you know, following his career, and as he blew up and got, you know, more and more recognizable and a household name, I think everyone kind of wanted to believe that maybe that that inner anger wasn't there anymore, that somehow he had transcended it. And I think if you had met him or knew his work well, you could tell that that certainly wasn't the case. But I don't know. That's kind of just what it was, and it was important. It definitely influenced the trajectory of my career.
Mhm.
So, Brooke, from what you said, from what I understood, what I see is I saw that you, Brooke, use use an Anthony Bourdain as an example for why you stay in the kitchen, why do you fight, why do you do this? Because it moves you away from a certain path that you don't want to be on anymore. That's what
Mm,
motivates you.
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
It's not a question; it's a statement.
Oh, oh. So are you saying it led me away? Are you saying
No,
it
it's
led me away from a path I
no,
didn't
no,
want to be
no,
on?
no. The only person that leads you away is you. All right. So I feel like from what I heard so far, it was a gun for shot. Uh, from what I hear, what I've heard so far, yeah, yeah. Welcome to Beirut.
This guy's in
Beirut
a
sometimes
farm,
you
man.
get that.
How
Oh,
is
we're all
this?
dead. It's a first for me. Doesn't sound like a first for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look here. The nice thing about Lebanon is that if the electricity goes out, we move on. There's got gunshot in the air. We move on. There's no food. We find food. We're prepared.
Mm-hmm.
We're prepared for all the things that are come. Like we don't like
Yeah.
it's normal. I unfortunately it's not
Yeah.
normal, but it is normal for us. Anyway,
Resilience creates gratitude.
yeah. So thank God for everything and nothing else. But like Said knows and I knows how many times have we've gone up the stairs and because of electricity, stuff like that. But from what I was saying, um, I just saw that Anthony birthday in the kitchen just uh, like filled up your mind and moving certain. That's why you were talking about. Like I saw you a video where you had a conversation with another female. What's her name on the Bone podcast that you were talking about antidepressants and stuff like that, and how
Oh, with Taylor Peterson?
I believe so. And how now I can see why you're against it. Like why why it was hard for you to get off medication and stuff like that. Like now I can see why.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have been out of commercial kitchens now for many years.
Okay.
I have heard that they've changed a bit. I'm sure they all haven't changed, but I don't really think dark basement kitchens that you spend 14 hours a day in with no windows, that are really sweaty, getting paid very, very little amount, with people who really enjoy being surrounded by knives, is all that great for anyone's mental and emotional health.
Is the kitchen just like a place for
Well,
the chefs to like hide their inner chef temper?
In my experience, you didn't have to hide it.
Because like everyone knows that like chefs
uh,
have like the wildest tempers, and they're just like always releasing it in the kitchen. And the fact that you mentioned in your
There's
previous
definitely
podcast about the
that
violence.
yeah. Yeah. There's definitely that I don't know, I'm not going to call it a trope because it's not really. There's that type of personality that definitely wants to be, or that is driven to that kind of work. I think it's a combination of a huge amount of pressure. It's art, there's that artist's temperament in there too. I mean, we're talking high-end kitchens, not like an Applebee's or something, but there's a lot of pressure. It's art, it's stress, it's poor diets, it's everything, kind of all the things you're supposed to avoid or mitigate in life, all poured into one every single day. I used to say that I think that this might still be true, that in a really high end kitchen with that level of pressure, I think it is one of the most stressful jobs on the planet. The only thing that I could sort of think might kind of compare is something like an ER doc, as far as the ups and downs and the intensity and the focus that's required. The difference between the ER docs and chefs, of course, is couple, like, is at least 1 0, maybe even 2 on their paychecks. ER docs actually get a lot more time off. But I mean, I was working 6 days a week for 14-hour shifts, and you go through just huge, intense periods when service comes. I mean, no one's dying, but the level of focus is kind of unparalleled in stress. So,
And is those high intensity situations really maybe correlated to like high functioning individuals? Because you seem like a high functioning individual, and sometimes I've noticed like a certain connection with people who are high functioning and some sort of like levels of depression, especially when they're not.
yeah, I mean, kitchens are filled with a bunch of degenerates too, so
Fair. Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I think it's a little bit of a precipice there. Some of the smartest people I've ever met have worked in kitchens, and also some on the other spectrum as well. So there's just a bit of I think if I could pick one personality type of people who I find in the kitchen the most, it's contrarian, and that takes many different forms. Like,
can you expand on that a bit? Yeah.
yeah, everyone I ever met who worked in the kitchen had some level of like fuck you that needed to be expressed, and a need to do something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that food is so primal. Everything about it is primal, and I think that so many of us who are in this industry are trying to access that primal state and understand what it means. And then, you throw money and capitalism and, angry customers on top of it, and that creates a very interesting situation. But at the end of the day, most of us got in because we want to create things with our hands. We want to take something and transform it, and then we want to nourish people and be told we did a good job somehow. Like that acceptance and also attention aspect is very important. I know very few chefs who put the level of care and time into their food that they eat for themselves as they do for other people. Like, there's a level of feeding the other person that's somehow very important. And it's just an environment that lets people thrive and do something that all humans need without and you kind of get to be whatever version of yourself you feel like being. I mean, you can be covered in tattoos if you want. That's more accepted than it used to be, but you can be covered in tattoos. You can have a past. You can have a record. You can do a lot of drugs, and as long as you show up for work, it's okay and no one cares. If it makes you better, great.
Wow.
Like, there's just, it's a little bit of this like acceptable Wild West world, and the lines of acceptability are very different than they are in a corporate job. I mean, sometimes I think now like if the Me Too movement had happened when I was in a kitchen, I just wonder how my experience might have been different, because I was literally getting paid less than the men. And they told me it was because I didn't have as much experience. And I was just looked at them and I'm thinking, we do the same job. What's the difference, right? And also, this is the difference between $7.25 an hour and like $7.85 an hour. So really, you can't give me the 50-cent raise. You know, it's very hierarchical. I mean, literally getting yelled at, having things thrown at you. I just had an image of one guy who there was a plate coming by his head. He just dodged it and kept sauteing, right? I mean, it just... I don't know if that's changed. There's been so much that's come out about some of these like horrific experiences that women have had, and a lot of chefs have had, but I can't imagine it's changed radically across the board. I'm sure there's been some incremental change, and it probably depends where you're at least in this country, US.
Yeah.
Wow. It seems like all chefs are going through a lot. When were you the best chef? When you were on the drugs, when you were off the drugs, or when withdrawal? When did you perform the best?
I mean, I can say that I am the best. I'm in the best cooking shape of my life now.
Wow.
That's for sure. But yeah, honestly, that's the right answer. I mean, like there was a time when I was in better cooking shape for service, which is all about speed in managing tickets and that kind of thing. But I don't need that every day. As far as the food I'm putting out now, it's the best it's ever been.
And is it because of like technical skills, or is it because like there's some kind of like more heart now into it than before?
That's a good question. I'd say it's both. I don't have nearly as much resentment in my work as I used to. I really, for many, many years, had a lot of resentment towards the work I did, because either being in a kitchen was miserable, and then when I owned my own bakery, I became a robot of my own creation, in that I grew to resent that as well, because for me, I love the artistic angle of it, the expression. And when you have a set menu that you have to repeat every single day because that's what your customers want, you don't really get that freedom. And then when you own a business, especially a food business, turns out the cooking portion's only about 30% of it. Other 70 is, managing customers and taxes and invoices and, dealing with what happens when the sewer line explodes under your bakery, right? Like that's most of business ownership. So really wasn't much cooking there. So now the reason why I think my work now, unfortunately, very true story. Now the reason why I think my work is so good is, one, I have so much experience at this point that I just know. It's just instinctual. I know what's going to work. I know what isn't. I trust that I know what's going to work. I can take inspiration from a lot of different places and kind of put it through my own filter and come out with something really great. I also really love the people I work with now and the way I work. So I like working with individuals, and I don't feel like I'm working for someone. I'm working with them. We share a common goal, and I'm part of that goal. And I do most of my work from home now too. That's a huge perk for me. I love it. And so that, yeah. And then just all the experience is just, sometimes I'm like, kind of, I think they say it takes like 10 years to be considered an expert at something. I'm not trying to say I'm an expert. There are so many people who know more than I do, but there's a point at which like every day isn't really a struggle in your work when you've been doing it long enough and you really trust yourself. And I've reached that point, and everything just flows, and I can kind of flow in and out of the flow, if you will, very easily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've entered the flow state, pretty much. You may never in the flow state.
It's a real thing in cooking. Like, It's a real thing.
100%. And
Wow.
you seem like you've also become a much more balanced individual in your work. Like you've gone away from like just the, you know, pushing out the quantities of amount that you're cooking and more focusing on the quality that
Mm,
you're producing. And this has also
yeah.
created a certain type of balance for your life. How how important is this balance?
Oh, Mish, the balance is very important to me. I feel like the past couple years for me have been just an absolute exercise in really figuring out what I want to do with my life and how I want to spend my time. So, my book, May Cause Side Effects, came out in September of 2022. And that was the culmination of 5 years of work that was unpaid and, no guarantee that it would ever even see the light of day. And a bunch of other changes in my life happened at that point when the book came out too. And so I was kind of left with this blank canvas of how am I going to move forward. And for me, it's just that balance between work and quality over quantity is really important. And, I want to be able to take a walk in the middle of the day, or, I love painting, have time to paint, and I don't do that for money. And so it's just how do I exist in the world and, make good art and also do all this stuff around antidepressant withdrawal advocacy and the over medication of children, while also making sure I carve out as much time as I can for things like staring at trees and painting, because that's really what I love and what I think life is actually about. That's
Mm-hmm.
where I find the beauty. So it's I don't know if I'll ever feel like I've found the balance. I feel like I have good balance now, but there's always a little bit of existential terror that something will shift and it will end.
I think it's just the beginning, Brooke, to be honest. I mean, this book right here, I've had tons of people just look at the cover and come to me and be like, "Oh, I hate it. It's awful." Not the the side effects.
Oh, thanks. So glad people hate my book. Good
But
talk.
no, just the cover alone. Like I've had people just look at the cover and be like, "You don't know what I'm going through," or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Like yeah, it's like, just I've heard like someone told me that like they just they were just out of their meds and then they were going through it
Yep.
and until they could go back to the CVS to replenish
Yeah.
on Monday. And that was that's what happened. Yeah, exactly. And may
Yep.
cause side effects. Who knew, right? When you're a kid and you're just depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's hard, but it's you get attached to a drug and then it's with you and for life it seems like.
Yeah, it's. I mean, look, the reality of the situation is when it comes to most psychiatric drugs and antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs, which is really my level, it's really my focus, and antidepressants are the number 2 most prescribed drug in the United States after statins. So this is an incredibly common drug, and we have no long-term clinical trials that follow anything that happens when we take these drugs long term. Most of the studies and all the studies that the FDA uses to determine whether or not they're going to approve a drug, 6 weeks, maybe 12. Like, that's the level of attention that is being paid to what these drugs are doing, right? And yet we have people who've been on them for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So at this point, anyone who's taking any one of these drugs for longer than the clinical trials, which maybe there's a handful out there that are like track people for a year or so, we're basically just in a gigantic long-term experiment that no one's looking at, and it's not controlled. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I can't look at what's going on from a mental emotional health standpoint in the United States, or from just a basic coping skills place in the United States, and say that what we're doing in the mental health field is working. It's obviously not. And the strategy is just to throw pills at people. So, and it's getting worse. We're expanding our criteria of mental illness every day. We are now deciding 7-year-olds are bipolar and 60-year-olds have ADHD, right? Like
Oh,
it's
that's awful.
it's expanding to promote a drug-centered approach. And if it worked, okay, but it's not.
It
You have to,
doesn't,
And
and
they're
we
not
know the
learning from their
incentives
mistakes.
behind it too.
no.
Yeah,
See,
Oh
exactly.
no, I mean,
you have to
yeah, we
see.
have, like, let's look at the, sorry, what?
You have to see the economic value behind these drugs. The more drugs are prescribed, the more money
Oh,
they get.
huge.
It's a big industry.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
why
many
they
billions.
don't cure for cancer, because it's a big industry. Chemotherapy is a big
Mhm.
industry. So you have to look.
Yeah.
Once you if you take out antidepressants, you have to fill it up with something else, because this is how they. That's the only solution. That's the only solution for this kind of product. Because you're looking at it,
Mhm.
the health side effects. All right, it's very bad. We both know it. It is super bad, but they don't care. They only look at the monetary value of these kind of things. I bet the person that created
Yeah, have you thought?
those antidepressants don't even take antidepressants, because they know it's so bad.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
it's actually it's kind of fascinating. Sometimes I talk to prescribers or just doctors and like psychiatrists, and you can kind of ask them if they've ever taken the drugs they prescribe for their patients, and they say no. And sometimes they slip up. And I had one psychiatrist tell me how dangerous they were a couple of months ago,
You see?
followed by, what other choice do I have? And like,
What else is there to do?
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's,
That's
what gets said behind closed doors is very different than what gets said publicly and
Mhm.
in commercials and
Mhm.
press releases.
Do
Yep.
you believe psychiatrists
Brooke, have
are
you ever
maybe
thought
like?
about
Yeah, I just was gonna ask. Do you believe psychiatrists are maybe
go side?
pressured into prescribing these medications? Like they don't have a choice. Like a legit, they don't have a choice.
Oh, I mean, so talking from kind of an American perspective, so the one of the huge problems is our insurance system.
Mhm.
So unless you're a psychiatrist or a doctor who doesn't work within the insurance system, and therefore you're seeing very wealthy patients who are just paying out of pocket, so that's kind of a different bucket. But most doctors, they have to accept insurance in order to get paid. In order to get paid by an insurance company, you have to have a diagnostic code. So if someone comes in to your office and they say, I'm sad, I think I'm depressed, and then the psychiatrist figures out, well, what happened? And they say, oh, well, my husband died 6 months ago and I'm having trouble dealing with my kid and work's been really frustrating. You can't code for that. So they code for depression and then give you a pill so they can get reimbursed. That's one of the big problems in the US. So from that perspective, yes, I definitely do think psychiatrists can feel kind of stuck in their strategies. And at the same time, most psychiatrists today were trained under a biomedical model, which has nothing to do with prevention. It has nothing to do with identifying problems before they start. It's everything to do with reaction. So they were trained that if someone is experiencing this set of specific symptoms that we can't test for, by the way, no test, no blood test, no scan, no x-ray,
Mhm.
nothing to actually say, oh, you have this disease in the way that you can with diabetes or any other most diseases, right? It's they decide it's a syndrome because it's a collection of symptoms that they have decided has this name, and then they give you a biological solution for it, which I find very odd that we are providing biological solutions for issues that we have no biological evidence of in their
Wow.
existence. um, So that's what they're trained to do. And there's a lot of pressure from institutions and from organizations. And if they start to speak out on that, it can become difficult for them professionally. But I think the more concerning thing is that the vast majority of antidepressants are not prescribed by psychiatrists. They're prescribed by general practitioners or nurse practitioners or, OBGYNs in the case of, postpartum stuff. So you're not even dealing with someone who has, the extensive training to maybe even understand polypharmacy when it comes to psychiatric drugs, or, a general practitioner is far less likely to have read the latest literature on Lamictal, or Paxil, right? Because they're dealing with coughs and stubbed toes and broken wrists and tonsils. But they pass out the antidepressants because they have been told that they are low risk and low side effects. So, and that's where most people are getting them from.
They should read your book.
They should. I would like my book to be required reading in medical schools.
It definitely make a change. Also, I remember you talking about how like the digestion of medication also is related to the metabolism of the medication that you take is also related to your genetics, your biogenetics.
The genetic. Well, okay. Yeah, we can talk about that. So there's been a bit of a I'm going to say a marketing push. I don't know if it actually is, but in the zeitgeist as of late, there's been this focus on genetics and drugs. So the problem is people don't really understand what it actually is and what it actually means. So if you go on Instagram or something and someone's talking about how they got their genetic testing done, and it says that Effexor is on their green list, so therefore it must work for them, right? That's what people think these tests are. So there's been, the technology is advanced to a point where now what you can do is there are companies out there where you swab a cheek and you send in the saliva sample, and they're able to run your genetics, like some of the genes, not all of them. It's, they pick 40 or something that we know are involved in the metabolism of psychiatric drugs. And so you send it off to the lab. I actually have my results right here. You send it off to the lab. It comes back and you get like, oh, these medicines are in the green column and these are in the yellow and these are in the red. And people see that and they think to themselves, oh, well, then I should be able to take any of the drugs in the green column and they're going to work. That's not what the test is. So the test is actually showing whether or not your body has the ability to properly metabolize the drugs in the way we would expect. So a better example of this would be if you go in for a surgery and you have to have an anesthesia, right? And, whatever drugs are in your anesthetic cocktail. But as it turns out, you are an ultra rapid metabolizer for one or some of the drugs in your cocktail. So if you had gotten your genetic testing done, it would have been in the red column. It would have told you you're an ultra rapid metabolizer, but you probably don't know this. And then you go in for surgery and you wake up in the middle of surgery because you have that drug has moved through your system so fast it either wasn't effective or it wasn't as effective for as long as they thought, right? Yeah. So you wake up in the middle of surgery and everyone's like, oh crap. And then, they take care of it and hopefully things are fine. So that could be an example of being an ultra rapid metabolizer of a drug. On the other end of the spectrum, you could be a non-metabolizer, which means that you physically cannot metabolize one of these drugs and it can build up into a toxic level in your system and basically start poisoning you from the inside out, right? And it can happen really fast. And it, if you're in a hospital situation, they're kind of attuned for these things because they kind of know some people can't metabolize certain things and then they're aware of it. But if you're just getting your psychiatric drug from a general practitioner and you don't know that you cannot metabolize it, well, maybe you take it for a couple days or a couple weeks and you start to feel really weird, and then it just hits that toxicity level, and the next thing you know, you're in a state of, psychosis, or you're committing a violent crime, or you've committed suicide, right? And everyone just thinks, oh, it was the mental illness. But no, then they do an autopsy, and if they do the right kind of autopsy, they can actually see you literally could not metabolize this drug. And so that's what the genetic test is for. And then there's places in the middle too. There's kind of intermediate metabolizers. So those can be interesting because
Not a textbook.
yeah. So this is mine for lists of some common antipsychotics. So I've never taken an antipsychotic, and I have no plans to ever take one. But there's one on the red list here.
Theothexine.
Theothexine. And so the reasons that my body apparently can't metabolize this well are that the serum level may be too low, which would means a higher dose would be required. And yeah, but I'd have to look into it to really see like what there's more information about specifically what it is, but that's all that genetic testing does, right? So, and there's way more to it than that too, because if you're on more than one drug at a time, then it's kind of a little bit like a funnel, right? Your body can't, like, funnels can only do so much. So if you put a bunch of sugar and a bunch of salt into a funnel, all the sugar is going to go down first, and then all the salt's going to go next, right? So if you're on multiple drugs, that's kind of how it goes through your system. Like, it has to take care of kind of, what it can in the way it's able to do it. And that can mean that you can overload one specific system if you're taking too many drugs that occupy that one system, and especially if you don't metabolize them well. So this is where polypharmacy can really create problems for people, because no one's looking about how these drugs are interacting within the individual, and no one is asking the question, well, are these symptoms that they're having, like, are they related to the drugs they're taking? Maybe, they might look like a mental illness, but if they didn't exist in the person until they started taking the drug, then it seems pretty reasonable to say, hey, this drug might be contributing to this, and maybe we should look at that. Instead, we just decide, oh, I guess this drug revealed that you have bipolar disorder too, so now we need to medicate you with bipolar drugs. And then you just watch people get these diagnoses on top of each other over and over again because they keep having issues. And I think that a huge reason they're having issues is because of the drugs they're on.
They give you a drug to compensate for the side effects of another drug.
Yeah, and this is not a radical statement. Like, if you've ever dealt with anyone, who's in the elderly population, they deal with this stuff all the time. You've got someone who's got a lung problem, a heart problem, and a kidney problem. Well, you give them the drug for the heart, and then it affects the kidneys, right? And then you give them a drug for the kidneys, and it affects the blood pressure, and then their lungs fill with fluid. And it's this constant management of symptoms created by the drugs that they are being given. And we can measure that in an elderly person. And the fact that we are so arrogant as to assume that what we're doing with these psychiatric drugs is not causing similar symptoms, and that we have no way of measuring it, and that we're going to vilify people who even suggest that perhaps this is something we should look at is just so baffling to me.
I don't
the difference.
I'm sorry,
Paco.
All right, so I think the only solution is, especially in the United States, like, for instance, what happened in the opiate epidemic. If you actually looked at the history from 2000 to 2008, there was a big influx of people taking opiates. That's why you saw like people coming out of the military, people getting into a regular car accident. They can just go up to the doctor, and the doctor would give them an opiate. Now, instead of an opiate, you have an antidepressant. The only way the United States can actually feel the pain of antidepressants is to go through that same kind of epidemic that happened with opiates, because they don't see it now. Because I think what she's saying, what Brooke is saying, is that there are people that are asking questions, but they're being paid to be quiet. That's what I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't, there's definitely money and perks have very, very much influenced the trajectory of antidepressants over the years.
Mm-hmm.
They influenced their early gestation significantly, like the amount of money that some doctors and whatnot were getting from pharmaceutical companies is huge. And what happened was, because of the kind of egregiousness of that, it really allowed the antidepressants to flourish. Now, there have been some formal changes around what doctors are and are not allowed to accept. The amount of money that they're allowed to take from pharmaceutical companies has gotten smaller. They're not, as they're not, at least publicly, walking around with six figures that were literally just gifted to them. But there's still other ways to do influence. I mean, like, the way a lot of these studies are written is the pharmaceutical company will do a study. It will be done in-house and in combination with the marketing team. The data will get cooked, and then they will have some sort of, like, basically just a name from someone who works at some prestigious university, and they say, "Oh, will you look at this?" And they look at their research and they say, "Oh, it looks good, sign off on it." And then the person whose name ends up on the research is the person from the fancy university. So when it then trickles down through the media, it's like, "Oh, Harvard doctor Jane Smith wrote this article saying that this drug did XYZ," when in reality it was written internally from research that was done in combination with the marketing team, right? So it's not, I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who are still getting paid oodles of money, either under the table or over the table in various ways, to market specific things and specific messages, but it's a bit more nefarious than that. It's not as straightforward.
Will you be getting a paycheck soon?
No. I would love to get a paycheck related to my book. Yeah.
They slide the through the mail.
Like I said earlier, there's not a lot of paychecks in this world, but but the reason why I do it is because I don't think at this point, and I really hope to be proven wrong here, but at this point, I don't see the nature of this industry changing anytime in my lifetime. And
wow. Okay.
I think that the only way to reach people is that this has got to be something the individual comes to, and they can only do that if they have more information. And as much as I would love to, I would love for legislation to change. I would love for it to no longer be allowed to do direct to consumer advertising in the United States. I would love for pharmaceutical companies to not be able to lobby on Capitol Hill, right? There's all these big things that, if we really wanted to make a change in public health, would really need to be implemented. And since I don't see that happening at a very quick rate, I think the only option people have is to look into the vast amounts of information that is available to them thanks to the internet, start to think for themselves, and really take control of their own health. I mean, I don't like it any more than anybody else does. Like, if I go to the doctor, I really want to just do what they say and believe it's going to be okay. But that's not how it is. Medicine has changed. It's changed a lot, even in the past 10 years. I mean, like, doctors have no time to really give their patients care. So who am I going to trust more? The person I've spent 10 minutes talking to, or everything I know about myself and my ability to go research whatever drug, I think that's the way that this changes. And that's what I'm seeing in the work I'm doing. I see people who are given more information, and that makes them wake up and they say, oh, I'm going to look into this. And then they take control of their health and they bring it to their doctor. And hopefully they have a good doctor and their doctor says, yeah, let's look at this. Let's see what's best for you. And then together they create a plan. And then that's how the person moves along. And I see this with everything, not just mental health, but physical health too. Like, and so that's why I think this work matters. It's why I keep doing it despite the fact that there are no paychecks. And I do see that some changes being made, and I get a lot of feedback from people who are making those changes for themselves.
That's beautiful to hear.
Wow.
Oh,
I mean, you were 15 though when you were assigned these
It was.
medications. Yeah. So I mean, you're a minor. You literally couldn't even do the research. I mean, it's like
That's true.
it's not fair.
No, the children thing really kind of adds a little wrinkle into it. So for me, what had happened is I was 15 and my father had suddenly passed away. And within about 6 months of him dying, I was put on a cocktail of antidepressants. And within about another year, I was on another 4 different drugs that were all prescribed as what I now know was side effects to the antidepressants.
Wow.
Because I did not have immediate side effects from the 2 antidepressants I ended up on, Effexor XR and Wellbutrin XL. So that would be venlafaxine and bupropion. My side effects were not immediate. It wasn't like I took them and immediately started throwing up. But I did have, over time, I started to have these weird physical things, and nobody really put 2 and 2 together, like I said earlier, and said, hey, maybe it's these psychiatric drugs. And so the solution instead was, well, if my stomach was bothering me, was to go to a gastroenterologist. The gastroenterologist gave me a pill. And, when I was having some symptoms of thyroid stuff, I went to an endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist gave me a pill. And so that's how, a 17-year-old ends up on 6 different drugs. And
that's bad.
Multiple diseases, right? That's how it happens. And so I think that, this instinct to eradicate all negative emotion and all negative experience from children is really detrimental, because there's no research on what is happening to kids long term with this stuff. I mean, there's some research on long-term outcomes with ADHD. For ADHD drugs, there's very little on what happens when we medicate a 7-year-old on Paxil forever. I mean, we know that it affects reproductive abilities. We know that it causes emotional blunting. It causes a decrease in ability to learn based on negative stimuli. So, having something bad happen to you is kind of how we learn, right? And so, some of these drugs, what happens is if you stop having a reaction to a negative event, then you don't learn. And the problem is that you do that for 15, 20 years and you find yourself in a place that is so far away from who you are, and you have no life skills. And that's where I ended up.
Wow. I mean, when Said was a young wee child, sorry for putting you on blast, Said, but they said he had like a neurochemical imbalance in his brain and such. Is that real?
No.
They made that up. They lied to Said. The doctor lied to Said.
Well, they told me that too. They told me that too. They lied to me as well. So the chemical imbalance theory was something that kind of came up starting in about like the 50s and 60s. There was a lot of experimentation in psychiatric hospitals, and they kind of noticed a few things that put out a theory that patients with low serotonin were depressed, and so therefore if we raise serotonin levels, then they wouldn't be depressed. That was kind of the basic theory, but again, there's no test for this. Yeah. No one is, you can't stick a needle into your brain and extract some fluid and look at it and say, like, look, those are the low serotonin levels. We can't do that. I mean, there are some ways to measure neurotransmitter levels, but they're very difficult, expensive, and not in real time and not practical in any way, right? And there's still no baseline as to like, there's 4 of us on this call, right? What number should we all be of serotonin? Should we be at 100 serotonin? Should we be at 5,000 serotonins per second? Like,
it's like
But
non-existent, right?
to be honest, it does make
So-
sense. I would have a chemical imbalance in my head because I've been diagnosed with epilepsy. I've been diagnosed with ADHD. I've been
Okay.
diagnosed with
Mhm.
depression. So it's like a cocktail of diagnosis, which and so the main thing that I am medicated on is mainly the epilepsy. The ADHD I never got medicated for.
Right.
The depression was for a very short term, and it was prescribed to me over 3 months initially. But then after a month and a half, I just told him I just went cold turkey, and I was like, I'm actually feeling happy and good. You know, it's like
Yeah.
But this was also something I wanted to what I was mentioning to you before we started recording, which was they didn't only prescribe me medication, they also assigned me therapy. So in combination with the medication, which was also a mild dose, it really helped me change my mentality. And this is
Yep.
and there's this quote from the Royal College of Psychiatrics, which is based here in the UK. They mentioned in their position statement back in May 2019 that commissioning bodies should continue to increase the provision of psychological therapies for depression, community support, and social prescribing opportunities. For what I understood from this quote is that they shouldn't only be prescribing medication, but they should also be prescribing different activities that involve social situations. And there is a study that is ongoing in the Harvard, which is to study what makes like the happiest life.
Yeah.
And
The happiness study, the longest study in the
exactly
scientific
longest
history, I
study.
think.
Exactly. And they found out that it's not physical health or mental health or anything of the sort. It is the relationships that you build over time and the ones that you keep.
Yep.
So that is definitely a very important social activity, which I would recommend people should be diagnosed with instead of just medication.
Yep. So the UK is better than the US.
Yes.
Still has some problems in this realm, but it has been better. And so, epilepsy, I think we put in a different bucket because it straddles the line. There's a lot of, neurology involved in there too. I mean, I believe it's a significant, it's measurable in a very different way. So, but as far as the rest of it goes, I mean, the research that pits antidepressants versus therapy or meditation or placebo, most of the time the meditation and the exercise and the therapy and the placebo outperform the antidepressant.
Wow.
And if they don't, the incidences when the antidepressant outperforms are usually incredibly clinically insignificant. And if you look at the research and kind of get into it, very often the blind is broken. So it's just a poorly designed study. And then, the data is just kind of, junk in, junk out. So I don't understand, but again, you can't make money on telling someone to go learn how to meditate and, deal with things. And, there's also, I think there's some research that we'll be seeing in the next 6 months or so, if I have got that right, that kind of looks at the outcomes of people doing therapy without medication and those who choose to do therapy with medication, because there's been, kind of a conventional understanding that, well, if the medication allows people to get to therapy, if they're done in combination, then it's going to be net positive. But I believe what they're starting to find is that the best outcomes are actually with people who are just doing, some sort of therapy or, and therapy, big umbrella term here, like maybe not just talk therapy, but gardening therapy or exercise or whatever there is, but they're getting support, right? Yeah. They are actively working on their issues through outside things. And I think what they're finding is that people actually tend to do better. And the hypothesis is that, the antidepressants can blunt people's emotions in a way where they don't actually access the big issues, that are going on in their life, because they're numbed and they're blunted. And so, the researcher doing that is Mark Horowitz. I remember he was talking on a podcast a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago. So that should be coming out. And it'll be interesting. I mean, when I talk about that stuff, sometimes people will kind of pipe up and they want to say, well, in super severe cases, then antidepressants can kind of really pull someone who's on the floor off the floor long enough to get them functional and back, and long enough to just do day-to-day life and maybe start getting into therapy. And, I'm willing to leave enough of a crack in the door open that there could be a therapeutic use for these drugs in specific cases, in certain circumstances, for a short period of time that's highly monitored. But that's just not the reality of how they're used.
Wow. Brooke, you offered a solution, it's like, okay, so everyone's like, okay, if I don't take drugs, what should I do? And you offered it, you need support. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You need support, and, there are a whole bunch of systematic issues that, make some of this stuff feel a little Pollyanna. People are lonely, they're disconnected, they hate their jobs, everything's more expensive. Just, breathing is getting more and more difficult to finance, every day. And so there are a lot of stresses on people. And I don't want to dismiss the struggle of that. And I think that the solution just cannot be pharmaceutical. That's not going to solve it's not going to solve society problems. It's going to make more. And it's also not going to solve individual problems too, because what it's really asking us to do is to face these things, and to, most importantly, examine our role in the situations we're in and how we are responsible for a lot of the crap that happens to us. Not all of it, right? I mean, I'm not responsible for the fact that my father suddenly died and that changed my whole life. But I am responsible for every single choice I made after that and how I chose to move forward. And it took me a long, long time to realize that I was always the one in control of how this was going to play out. And I often wonder, would I have realized that a lot earlier if I had been so, numbed, right? Because if I could just kind of walk my way through life asleep, then I had no real impulse to make change until it got so bad that I was, kind of jerked out of my, waking coma, if you will. But I think that maybe had I not been medicated, I would have come to this conclusion a lot earlier, and I wouldn't have lost so much of my life.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I had one more question about this topic. What about the school shooters being on antidepressants? Is this true or not? I don't know if you know about this.
Yeah, I do know about this, or some stuff about it. For that, I would really point to the work of Selma Eikelenboom. She's from the Netherlands, I think. So please forgive me as I absolutely butcher her last name. Selma Eikelenboom Scheveld is her name. She is a researcher based now out of New Mexico, and she's a forensic researcher. And she is really the one where I started going down the rabbit hole of genetic testing and what it meant, because she's doing autopsies on people who commit all sorts of horrific violent crimes, including some of these mass shooters. And she's finding some really interesting things about, whether or not they're able to metabolize these drugs and when they were being given them. So I think for anyone who wants to learn more about that, I would really point to her work. It's, again, I think that this is something that unfortunately has just become a political football in our country, and it allows us, or it disallows us, to ask really important questions. And so, yeah.
I'm just curious about all the side effects more than the politics of it. You know, I just want to know the truth. I want to get out of all this political mumbo jumbo and get to, okay, what's effective, what's not.
Yeah, I believe, and kind of want to triple check this, but believe she did the autopsy on the Aurora shooter and found that he had toxic levels of some psychiatric drugs in his system because he couldn't metabolize it.
All right, Paco,
Wow.
any thoughts on all of this? I mean, I don't know how
I
to
mean, I
make
did
sense
the
of all
normal
this.
stuff, so I did like weed and alcohol. You guys are
I'm just gonna look this up real fast just to make sure I'm right.
Fact check it. Check
yeah,
it.
fact check it. But I did the normal, the coke, and like I did. I don't know why. Like I did person bikes and stuff like that, but I didn't really get into antidepressants. And I did Xanax. Like I've done Xans, and that's it.
Oh,
But
For
all the other
fun.
stuff, I'm very. But I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I was born in Missouri. Like you're talking about guns and like school shooters. If
Yeah.
that kid, if a kid came to my school or the school, he would probably be dead on the spot. Like I was raised around guns my whole life. Like I was raised around
right.
knives and guns. So that guy,
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. Maybe
Okay.
it's a different era. I don't know.
So here is yeah. So oh god, this is just
A lot of jargon.
no, it's just leading to.
I accept all.
I mean, I'm like quite sure I'm right about the I know she worked on the Aurora shooter case, and I know there was a connection to psychiatric drugs in that case.
Hmm.
Um,
So the level of toxicity from the medication affects the mental state of the individual as
y-
well.
I think that's what it was. It's like
Okay.
she, and I know that this happens in I know that this happens.
Yeah.
I know that this happens. I know someone
What if you
anecdote, well,
could
not
do
per
SEO
Eek.
smarter and faster?
Not I know. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up.
I like how it was about SEOs and we were talking
There's
about SEOs on like a previous podcast. Like maybe 2
Yeah,
podcasts
it's
yeah,
ago.
I know. There's I was trying to pull up a video of her talking. But so I mean, I know someone who in this, like, I've met this person. He's Canadian, and he had a genetic inability to metabolize Zoloft, and
Wow.
he took Zoloft, and within 3 weeks he went into a violent psychotic state and killed his son. And
Say that.
he was put in jail for a while, and then he went through the court system, and he's walking free today and was completely let off the hook because of the medical professionals and forensic scientists who did the testing on him and said this was not in his control. Like this drug caused this in him. Here's all the research, and he's like, this is not a dangerous person. He just can't metabolize this drug. And so
Yeah.
he has a pretty high profile case out of Canada, and now he does advocacy on psychiatric drug safety because of this story. And this is someone like I can't imagine living with that every single day.
And Brooke, before we end
I
this
feel bad
podcast
for his
and
mother.
conclude it, I just I just have one final question for
Yeah,
you.
like
Sure.
Have have you forgiven the doctors that have prescribed you all these medications and put you through all this torment over the decade?
It's interesting because despite everything I've been through around this topic, I've never really had any ill thoughts towards these people who are prescribing these drugs. I mean, I haven't. I had a series of bad doctors who just weren't good at their jobs, did not make any effort to further their education, did not listen to me, did not did not abide by first do no harm principles at
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never been angry at them, and I've never been angry at my mother for, she took me to the child psychiatrist, and she was the one who signed off on it, and I've never felt angry towards her either. And And when I talk to other people, this is all rare. I know a lot of people who are just so mad at the people who they say did this to them. And from my perspective, you know, I was influenced by what they said, and it was still my choice to listen and take these drugs every day. You know, when I was a child, maybe different, but as I became an adult, like I became fully engrossed in the identity around being someone who was depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of chicken and egg, but I personally don't think that I could really move on and thrive and live a wonderful life that I love without letting go of, you know, any anger or resentment. And I just never had it, because I think that at the end of the day, I really don't think any of these people were bad. Everyone was just doing the best they could with the information they had at the time. And I could blame them for being arrogant. I can blame them for being flippant and impatient, and I can hope that maybe they have learned over the years, but they were also working in a system that isn't really supporting the reasons why they got into medicine. So
Mm-hmm.
I never really felt like I had to forgive, because I was never really angry at them. I've had to work a lot more on forgiving myself for taking as long as I took to get here, and a lot more forgiveness for who I am, because who I am is not conventional. And so I'm not going to live a conventional life, and it's going to create unconventional challenges. And I've needed to be a lot kinder on myself when that comes up. So that's where I've focused most of my forgiveness energy. And that seems to be a lot more productive than someone I had one conversation with for 15 minutes years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's good to hear.
I learned a lot from you, Brooke, really, in your story. And I'm going to be a better person because of it. And I'm going to spread the word and tell other people your story as well.
Well,
So
thank
again,
you
it lives
guys.
on. So yeah, so I'm ready to sue Big Pharma. So how do we support you in your
Oh yeah,
in
I
that
mean
cause?
they've been sued. They have more money and more lawyers though, so it's gonna take a lot.
It's insane. Yeah.
It's gonna take a lot. Again, this is why I think that like grassroots is maybe a little better.
Mm-hmm. So get
But
your book for
yeah,
sure.
as far as supporting me and my work, the big things are, please buy the book, buy one for your friends, give them to your prescribers in your life. It's a book that was written in a very specific way to help prescribers, patients, and parents better understand some of the long-term consequences of medicating children and what psychiatric drug withdrawal can look like. So more people don't get stuck in a state of, um, you know, so people can understand what withdrawal is, which we didn't really even get too much into what withdrawal is, but that's what the book is about. It is a book that the quality and impact of it, I honestly believe, should and needs to be in as many medical school curriculums as possible. And that's one of my long-term goals. So if you have any access into med school curriculums or continuing education, I would love to hear from you. I do public speaking on the topic, and happy to travel and come talk to your organization. And then you can find me all over the internet at Brooke Siem. That's BrookesIem. And I also have a newsletter called Happiness is a Skill, which I kind of explore all these topics in depth and go into the latest news, and it's a good resource, I think, for people. So yeah.
All right, perfect. Are you ready,
Thank you so
guys?
much
Let's
for
do
that.
it. Let's
And
help Brooke. Let's make it happen all the way. Seriously, spread the word. Spread the word. Let's do it.
well, guys,
Well, thank you.
thank
I mean, this is like quite the global impact, so I'm pretty impressed and excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
thank you again, Brooke, for your time, and thank you everyone for watching.
I
Don't
appreciate
forget
it,
to
bro.
like, share, and subscribe. And you know how we end this. Salute to the camera. Cover it with your hand.
Ouch. Woo! Boop, boop, boop.